Okay, everyone, so maybe we can get started. And the Dhamma talk this evening is going to be on the challenging topic of free will. So this was a suggestion by someone. So I like suggestions actually, and if someone has a good idea, I think it's nice to take it up. But it is something that has been troubling philosophers for 2,000, 3,000 years. And no one has found a solution to it. So are we going to find a solution tonight? Absolutely. Tonight is the day. Now the time has finally come after 3,000 years to solve this riddle of free will. So high ambitions. But the reality is that it's very kind of, especially in Western philosophy, it's a very complicated issue. And if you start reading some of these kind of philosophical papers about these things, your head starts to spin very quickly, and you wonder what on earth is going on with these things. So I'm not going to go into any deep kind of philosophical discussion. That's not the purpose of these Dhamma talks. Rather, the purpose is to kind of set out the basics and then discuss it from a Buddhist point of view. And what is interesting about this, a very profound philosophical topic like this, actually Buddhism has a lot to say about it. And hopefully some of those things will come out of this talk tonight. So we'll see what happens. And the first thing to realize about the idea of free will, it may sound like this is a very abstract kind of discussion. Yeah, is there free will or not? Who cares? Let's get on with the practice. Why are we talking about this? What sort of, this is not a course in philosophy. This is about, overcoming suffering, etc. But the reality is that there are some very practical implications of this question. And this is one of the things I want to get to today. What are the practical implications? I think this is very important because Buddhism is not about, having a system of philosophy. Actually, some aspects of Buddhism are exactly about that, but not the kind of aspects that we deal with here. It is about how to apply these teachings, how to make them meaningful in a profound sense. And so this is going to be a very important part, hopefully maybe the most important part of what this talk is about, seeing the practical aspects. So that is kind of the idea. One of the interesting things about this idea of free will is that it is a very commonly discussed thing in the Western world, in Western philosophical tradition, in Western religion. These things are very important. But in Buddhism, it is not really important at all. And that is kind of very fascinating. There are a few places in the suttas where the Buddha talks about ideas that are very similar to the idea of free will, and I will mention those as we go through the talk tonight. But it's not really a big issue in the kind of Eastern, especially the Buddhist tradition. And that is already kind of fascinating. Why exactly is that the case? And one of the main reasons why it is the case is because the idea of free will really comes from the idea, it starts with the idea of a creator God. And then to justify the idea of a creator God, you have to add free will into the equation. So why is that? What is the connection with the creator God and free will? And the connection is this, that in many of these, when you have a creator God, and especially if that God also is supposed to be a loving God, who doesn't want to create suffering in the world, well then you have a problem. If you have a loving creator God, why then is there so much suffering? Why are there tsunamis? Why are there big fires in LA? I heard Los Angeles had some terrible fires just going on, still going on maybe. Why is there so many problems in the world if God is all loving? And the answer then from the traditions where they have a creator God is that there is free will, because free will means that human beings do things on their own accord. The God grants you this, and then you make mistakes because you're granted free will. So free will is used to explain a very fundamental problem in many theistic religions, and that is kind of why it becomes an issue. But in Buddhism, where there is no creator God, then it kind of fizzles away. It doesn't really have any purpose anymore. Why should we talk about free will if that's actually not an issue? And so the whole thing does not become a philosophical debate in the same way as it does in theistic religions. So, to start out, what does even the idea of free will mean? What does it mean to have free will? And what it means is that you could potentially take an alternative choice, make an alternative choice at any juncture. There's always the possibility of choosing otherwise. That is what free will really means. What does that mean in practice? Well, what it means in practice is that this morning when you had breakfast, you were maybe choosing to have a certain kind of breakfast. Maybe you chose cereals. You could have had toast. So toast or cereals, which one are you going to choose? So the idea here is that given the same kind of background, let's assume that you chose cereals for breakfast. Given at that particular point where you made that choice, you could have chosen toast instead. That is the idea of free will. So that's kind of a very banal thing, cereals or toast. But a more important one are, of course, the moral issues in life. So you're faced with a moral issue. You're faced with a choice: should you, tell this person off, or should you not? What kind of is the right way? Where am I coming from? What is going on? And so there, again, you choose maybe, okay, I'm going to tell this person off because they need to be told. And of course, later on, you may regret that because you realize you were coming from a bit of ill will or something. So then the idea of free will is the idea that at that point, you could have made a different moral choice. You could have chosen instead to not to do that, not to tell that person off. That is the idea of free will. It's open to you to do things differently. And that straight away, you can see that there are some problems with that. Because you come to your breakfast table in the morning. Did you really have a choice? If everything was given to that point in exactly the same way up to the point of the choice, would it really be possible to choose differently if everything was the same? And I think intuitively, if you think about it, if everything was exactly the same, then there is no reason why you would choose differently. All the conditions, all the causes in that moment are set already. And so you would actually do exactly the same thing. There is no basis, at least from my intuitive understanding, there is no basis really to think why you would make a different choice when all the cause and conditions are exactly the same. And that is, so this is, you can see here that there is a tension here between our natural feeling that many things are conditioned and then the sense that there is some kind of freedom of choice. There is a problem here. Kind of two things are kind of, moving up against each other. But maybe there is a little bit of free will there left. Maybe it's not entirely determined. But certainly conditioning and cause and conditioning are very, very important part of this. So one of the things that kind of in my life, just to kind of give you an idea from my own personal experience, where it felt to me like I was taking a free will choice, and that is when I decided to become a Buddhist monk. This is one of those really big things in life that really kind of matter, right? You're going to choose this way. It kind of makes a big difference. Either you're going to go the way of the world and kind of have a family, maybe, and a job and all of that kind of stuff, or you're going to give all of that up. It sounds like kind of those are very fundamental decisions that we make. And that must come from free will, right? Surely we make those decisions from free will. So this is how I became a Buddhist monk. I'll just give you some idea. It's a long story. There's a lot of kind of, back and forth and all kind of things happening. But this is essentially how it happened. So I was doing some meditation. I had some nice results. And because meditation was kind of quite common in those days, I tried out some meditation. I'm not going to tell too much of the backstory because it's going to take us all evening. But I was doing some meditation, I had some nice results, and then later on I kind of went to university, took another degree, and I wasn't really happy with that. It was kind of slightly miserable, and I thought about my meditation. Okay, maybe I should try to do some more meditation. So where should I do that? Maybe a Buddhist monastery. Yeah, maybe I should check out the Buddhist monastery. Yeah, I had no idea. I had absolutely no connections. I didn't know any Buddhist. I didn't know very much about Buddhism at all. I was completely. I was born in Norway. I did skiing as a young person. I was complete atheist basically from the get-go. I couldn't care less about religion. I didn't know anything about nothing. That's not very much at all actually. So you. And so the way I discovered kind of the Buddhist monastery was I went to the ancient white pages. I think I told this here last Friday, I can't remember that anymore. I went to the white pages, looked through BUDDH, Buddhist Society of London, telephone number, called them up. Where is the nearest Buddhist monastery? And I said, oh yeah, you go to this place, Amravati, Chithurst. These were kind of monasteries outside of London, and these were part of the same tradition that Ajahn Brahmali comes from, the Wat Pah Pong tradition in Thailand. And so I went to these monasteries, and that's how my monastic path started. Yeah, it sounds like free will, doesn't it? It sounds like there's no conditioning from the outside. I knew almost nothing about Buddhism. I had no Buddhist friends. I just looked up Buddhist in the white pages. Surely, if there is free will, this is an example of free will. And then later on, I thought I heard a talk by Ajahn Brahmali, kind of underground talk by Ajahn Brahmali. I listened to that, and I thought, yeah, Ajahn Brahmali is my teacher. I called up Ajahn Brahmali. I said, can I come to Australia? He said, who are you? And I said, I'm so-and-so. You can come to Australia. And so I came to Australia. And this is kind of how I ended up as a Buddhist monk. It sounds like really my choice. There was no obvious external influence whatsoever. It's all coming from inside of me. And so I would say, if there is free will, that's it. But the strange thing, and later on I started to reflect on those things. What actually happened? The later, the more distance I got between those events and where, and the more distance between where I was and those events, 10 years, 20 years, now it's 30 years already since that happened. Someone said I was getting older, and I think they're right. Yes, 30 years I became a monk. I must be getting older, so this is a long time ago. And so, and the more distance actually I get from the events, I start to see actually it wasn't really all that much free will at all. When I looked at the overall picture, there was something inside of me that was already there. It wasn't really so much a choice, it was just a feeling that I was following along. There was something that was already internalized in me somehow. Not from this life, because in this life I haven't really been kind of under any kind of influence of Buddhism or whatever, but maybe from a past life, maybe from something much deeper. The more distance I got, the more natural it seemed. It seemed, of course, I was heading in that direction. The fact that I had to look up the white pages, that was actually quite incidental. If it hadn't been that way, I would surely have found Buddhism in some other way, because the drive from inside was so powerful. There was something pushing me in that direction. And the more I thought about it, I eventually realized the main reason probably why I ended up becoming a Buddhist monk has nothing to do with free will at all. It has to do with now, I think, because I was a Buddhist monk or a Buddhist nun maybe in a past life. That is the reason why I'm doing it now. That is where that impulse comes from. That is the thing that drives you. And at that moment, I realized instead of this being free will, it's like a habit. I'm railroaded on these tracks, heading on this freight train, going down, following the old habits from the past. That is why I become a Buddhist monk now. And these kind of reflections, the more you start to look at the choices that you make in your life, the more you start to contemplate where it really comes from, the more distance you get from these things, the more it starts to feel that things actually, no, they all come from causes and conditions in the past. They are not really choices or free choices that you make in the moment. And this is a very powerful, the more you think about it, the more you can see that if there is free will, certainly it is very, very small, and that kind of the cause and conditions are far more important than anything, that you do yourself. But actually, when you really think about this thing even more deeply, especially when you consider the Buddhist point of view of these things, you have to ask yourself, well, how can there be free will? What is that freedom? And the only way that there can be a freedom must be that there is something beyond and above the causes and conditions that drive you. If everything is just cause and conditions, and your choice, your intentions, your decisions are driven by those causes and conditions, then obviously there cannot be any free will. So there must be some agency, some aspect of the will, some choice maker apart from cause and conditions that has that free will. Otherwise it becomes impossible. And there are different ways that the history of philosophy or religion have kind of suggested how that happens, what that agent actually is. And sometimes that agent is like a soul. Sometimes it is some kind of internal essence that stands apart from conditioned phenomena. Sometimes it is like what they call an emergent property. An emergent property is like you have the cause and conditions, but or you have this body and mind, and somehow beyond this body and mind, there's this that kind of works together to emerge some kind of agency that somehow stands apart from the constituent parts that actually made it up. So whatever it is, these are kind of fancy ways of saying that there is an agent that somehow stands apart from cause and conditions. And in many religions in the world, in many philosophical systems, they actually believe in that, but not in Buddhism. And this is kind of the whole point of Buddhism. The point of Buddhism is that there is only causes and conditions. There is no independently inherent kind of agent or any kind of aspect of personality that stands apart from cause and conditions. This is one of the kind of root ideas on the Buddhist path, or what Buddhism is all about, or Buddhist philosophy is all about. And so if there is nothing apart from that, if your intentions, your choices are entirely made up, entirely conditioned by cause and conditions that decide them, then there cannot be any free will. Free will becomes just an illusion. It becomes something that maybe we feel that we have, but when we look at what's actually going on, it doesn't make any sense. And that is basically the Buddhist idea. That free will is an impossibility because everything is just cause and conditions coming together. At this moment, when you make a decision, that decision is formed by all of those cause and conditions in the past, and there's no separate agent that actually makes that decision, and that is the critical point. And the Buddha talks about this. I hope you're following me. I hope I'm not kind of going way over the top here. It gets better after a while. It gets more interesting when we get to the actual practical applications of this. So hang in there, because the practical applications are what really matter here. But there is a very interesting sutta, and this is called, many of you who have a Buddhist background, you will know this sutta. It's called the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, and it is Anatta Sutta basically means the discourse on the characteristics of non-self. So what does it mean that there is no self, that there is no inherent essence in a human being? And one of the things that the Buddha says in this sutta is essentially that you cannot choose your choices. You cannot choose your choices. You cannot say, may my choices be like this, may my choices not be like that. May my intention be like this, may my intention not be like that. And if you cannot choose your choices, that is the same thing as saying that your choices are caused and conditioned by all these forces. Forces that are external to you, and also forces inside of you that come from the past, memories, past lives, whatever it might be. And so the Buddha is actually quite explicit. It is not something that has a very strong or important position in the suttas, but in one of the most fundamental suttas that helps us to understand the idea of non-self, he makes this very important point. Choice is not something that you cannot choose your choices. Your choices happen according to cause and conditions. And this is kind of where this idea is explained by the Buddha himself. So that is a bit of the background. I think that from a Buddhist point of view, the idea of free will does not make any sense. And in that, he will agree with certain modern philosophers and psychologists There was a very interesting book that we were given at Bodhinana Monastery a few months ago called Determined by a psychologist called Robert Sapolsky, I think his name is. It's a book that has kind of been doing the rounds, been a bestseller, I think, around the world. And he's basically making exactly that argument, but from a secular point of view, not from a kind of Buddhist or religious point of view at all. So that was kind of interesting here. So what does this actually mean? And as soon as you say that there is no free will, people say, oh, then I can just lie down all day in my bed and kind of stare at the ceiling and do nothing because there's no free will. What's the point of doing anything here? And that is exactly the wrong understanding of no free will. That is a completely wrong way of thinking about it. Because what the Buddha is saying and what these philosophers are saying, they're saying that the will is conditioned. They are not saying that it is irrelevant what you choose. No one is saying that it is irrelevant. There are choices to be made. Choices happen. It's just that those choices are not free. And that is a very different thing. Obviously, choices actually make a difference. You know that in your own life. If you choose one thing, you go to jail. Yeah? You know what that's like. If I chose the wrong thing, okay, I go to jail. Or you choose wrong thing, you have remorse afterwards. You feel bad about yourself because you chose that. But if you choose to be kind, actually you feel good about yourself. So it's bleeding obvious to anyone who uses their mind. And please use your mind for these kind of things. It's very obvious that choices actually matter. The point is that those choices are caused and conditioned. That is the difference. And this has some very, very interesting implications, and I'll come back to those in a second. But the first very important implication is that, well, what about karma? Because if all our choices are caused and conditions, how can we be responsible for our karma? How can we be morally responsible? If everything is cause and condition and you just do it because you are like a robot, do this, say something bad, say something good, blah. How can we be responsible? And the answer is that the idea of karma, as we have it in Buddhism, karma, the fact that your intentions have results in the future, actually is not really related to responsibility as such. If by responsibility we mean that you are capable of making different choices, if that is what we mean by responsibility, then that is not what karma is about at all. Karma is merely about one thing, and that is that your intentions, how you live your life, your intentions here and now, have results in the future. That is really all it is about. If you have a bad intention now, you do something bad, straight away you feel bad about it. Hopefully you're not some kind of psychopath. And the psychopaths in here. Hopefully you feel a little bit bad about it if you do something bad, and hopefully you feel good about yourself if you do something good. That is karma, and that carries on into the future, also into future life. That's how karma kind of moves on into the future. And so hopefully you see that. So karma is really just the law of how intentions have results in the future. It is not about whether you are responsible in an ordinary sense or not. Whether you should feel responsible or not. And that's kind of really interesting, that actually these are just laws of nature. And so the purpose of the Buddha to teach you this law is because by being taught that law, that becomes another condition that conditions you. And the moment you are conditioned by understanding that law of nature, that intentions have result, you start doing the right thing, which leads to your own happiness. So this is kind of the point of understanding the Dhamma, or understanding the nature of the world. That is another conditioning factor which then actually makes you live in the good way. And that is what is going on here with the idea of karma. So it doesn't have you don't need the idea of free will. This whole system operates very well without it. So this is the first point. Don't go back after this talk, lie down in your bed and just stay there. That's going to be very bad. And remember that when you do that, when you go back, and if you make that kind of choice, that is also a choice. That choice is also happening. That choice of lying down in your bed will also have consequences for you. And if you lie down in your bed all the time, it's going to have very bad consequences. Yeah, you know that already. It's kind of, again, it's very obvious. So please don't do that, because then you will have misunderstood what this is about. Rather, if you understand what I'm talking about, it should give you the opposite feeling. Wow, this is kind of scary. Yeah, what is going on here? Am I trapped by this? That is how you should feel. And then it should actually give you grounds for practicing more of the spiritual path, because you understand the danger of not having any free will, what that actually means. That is the right way of thinking about it. So let us come to some of the consequences. Yeah, how does the lack of free will, if that is correct, and the arguments I've been making tonight are correct, what does that actually mean in terms of how we live our lives, how we think about other people, how we think about ourselves? And one of the most important things that it means, if what I'm saying is right, people are not really responsible. People are, in a sense, the victim of cause and conditions around them. Yeah, at this moment, all the cause and conditions come together in a certain way, and you do something kind. Yeah, why? Well, not because you are fundamentally a good person. Yeah, no, not at all. Sorry. I mean, be happy about your goodness, because being good leads to feeling good about yourself. So that's why it is a good thing to do. But actually, you cannot really take credit for actually that, for being kind. But that also means that if you do something wrong, yeah, you happen to do the wrong thing, actually, you're also not to blame. Again, it is the cause and conditions that conspire against you and force you, that compel you to do in the present something that maybe you don't really want to do, but you can't avoid it because those cause and conditions are so powerful that it just make you do it, whether you want to or not. And so this is kind of the first thing to learn from this. And when you understand that the people in the world are the victim of the past, the victim of past life, the victim of cause and conditions in this life, yeah, once you understand that, then you start to have compassion for them. Then you start to have forgiveness, because you know that actually there's no point in blaming someone or being upset with someone, yeah, who actually is a victim of all of these things. And of course, this has also all kinds of consequences. Yeah? It has kind of consequences for how we run our prison systems, for example. And I would say all prison systems should always be aimed at rehabilitating the prisoners, because they didn't really do that on purpose. They were affected by their childhood. Yeah, there's some very interesting statistics about what kind of people go to prison. And a very, very high percentage have some kind of mental disorders. A very, very high percentage had a terrible childhood. A very, very high percentage basically are damaged human beings. Of course they commit crimes. It would be a miracle if they didn't commit crimes, for goodness sake. And so you start to see, and maybe in the past life also they had these terrible cause and conditions. And so the more you kind of understand what is going on, the more you say, okay, well, let's try to rehabilitate these people. They probably want to be good citizens, but actually it's very hard for them to be good citizens. And then you change the justice system to be one of rehabilitation rather than taking revenge on these people, which unfortunately is very common in justice systems around the world. It's about revenge rather than seeking to rehabilitate. And I think that's madness. Why on earth do you want to take revenge? And especially on someone who doesn't really understand what's going on anyway. If you can rehabilitate someone and make them into a good citizen, which most people want to be, it is well known that most prisoners actually want to be good citizens. Then that is obviously what we should do. So we start to expand, we start to understand people in a different way. We have far more forgiveness, we have far more compassion for people in the world. If you understand that people actually deep down want to be good, and this is an argument that I always make, everyone wants to be good. Why? Because we know intuitively, yeah, at least at some level, that being good makes you feel good. So if you can't do it, it means that you are blocked from doing what you want to do. And if you are blocked from doing what you want to do, then surely compassion is the right way to respond to that. And that's what we should be doing in the world. Respond to the world with compassion. Respond to the world with forgiveness. Trying to understand people. Understand that everyone in this world, in one way or another, is actually a victim all around, everywhere. That's a very powerful insight. And that is a result of this idea of understanding. There is no free will. We are coming from cause and conditions. That is one of these learning lessons that we gain from understanding the lack of free will. But there's another one which I think is even more profound and even more important in many ways. And that is to understand that, well, if there is no free will, if we are the result, all our decisions are a result of cause and conditions from the past, if our personality, who we are, is a result of cause and conditions in the past, then in a sense we are trapped. You cannot really navigate. If every choice you make comes from the past, it's a sense of entrapment. How can we break out of this? It means like you're just moving on in the world. Okay, desires say you should do this, you're brought up in this way, they said believe in this religion, don't believe in any religion, do these things. And you just do things like an automaton, like a robot who's programmed by society, by cause and conditions in the past. That sounds like a trap, doesn't it? And that was a little bit the feeling I had when I thought, actually, I've probably been a monk in a past life. So maybe this is a trap. Because it's a habit. I'm just doing the same thing again. I'm just programmed from the past. Okay, some traps are better than others, right? So it's a good trap maybe. But anyway, it's still a kind of trap in a sense. And that starts to sound very scary, right? If you are trapped, if you are purely the result of cause and conditions around you, and you're kind of just moving around like this zombie particle, moving around like Brownian motion. I don't know if you know, but Brown is something I learned in high school, this kind of molecules being moved around randomly, and we're kind of moving around randomly, roaming around the world, now going this way, now going that way, now going up, now going down, now suffering, now being happy, outside of our control. It is a very worrying and concerning thing. So if the Buddha is right, I've got to get out of here. This is it. I'm finished. I'm going to shave my hair right away and become a monastic. That's why I have Venerable Vimoka here. He shaves heads. That's his speciality. So you come up over here and he will kind of sort you out afterwards. That's the only reason why he's here. This is no, it's not. Of course it isn't. So this is the thing, and so this is kind of the understanding of the Dhamma. If you understand how the Buddha is teaching, actually it brings about this sense of urgency. If the Buddha is right and he has found a path out of this, I better follow that path, because otherwise I could be in real trouble. If there is no Buddha around, or there's no one around to understand this idea of lack of free will, then we are in very, very serious trouble. And so what that means then is that you start to take these teachings of the Buddha very seriously. You start to try to figure out what they mean. What is the Buddha talking about? You start to understand that right view is incredibly important. Part of that right view is to understand how conditioned your decisions and choices actually are. That's part of that right view. Because right now you can see, wow, is this true? You can probably feel that, of course, that has very powerful consequences. And so you go to the suttas, you go to the word of the Buddha, you try to figure out what is going on. What is the right way of understanding the world? And as you start to understand the world aligned with how the Buddha understood it, it does something to you. It changes your intentions. It changes your choices. Not from free will, but because now you are conditioned by the word of the Buddha. That changes your choices, and then you move in the right direction as a consequence. So doing nothing is not the answer. What is the right answer is to make sure you get conditioned in the best way possible. That is the answer if there is no free will. That is the right way to think about this. And so you start reconditioning yourself. You start to understand the importance of hanging around the right kind of people, hanging around the noble ones, befriending the Buddha, being with other good people who also lean you in the right direction. All of these things become critical for your own well-being and also for the well-being of people around you. Get this wrong and it's not going to work out. And there is, in the suttas, and this is another place where the Buddha kind of hints at the idea that there is no free will. There's a very famous sutta that, again, many of you who have a Buddhist background, you will know about this, and some of you who don't have a Buddhist background, you will probably also know about this. But the sutta is where Venerable Ananda is the Buddha's attendant, very, very faithful attendant to the Buddha, and he goes to the Buddha. He has had this insight, and he says to the Buddha, he says, "Venerable Sir, I think, that spiritual friendship is incredibly important. Actually, it must be so important that surely it is at least half of the spiritual life." And I remember when I read that, I thought, half the spiritual life, sure is half. Surely there's not, that's exaggerating, right? What do you mean half the spiritual life? Of course it can't be that, because you have all these other things, you have mindfulness and kindness and right view and the Noble Eightfold Path and the 5 spiritual faculties and whatever. You have all of these other things. So that's kind of exaggerating. Ananda, go back and read the suttas, Of course, the thing is that that's completely wrong, And so then the Buddha responds to Venerable Ananda, and what he says to Ananda, he says, "Do not say so, Ananda, do not say so. Spiritual friendship is 100% of the spiritual life." And now you can start to understand why that is the case. In light of the idea that there is no free will, obviously, it has to be 100% of the spiritual life, because without that insight, without that starting point of someone who actually understands these profound ideas, well, there isn't really any real spiritual life at all. Certainly not the one that leads to the goal that the Buddha laid down. So now this starts to make sense. You can start these things coming together. In other words, being conditioned by the right kind of teachings, being conditioned by the Buddha or by someone who has a similar kind of insight becomes the critical thing that makes the spiritual path possible. And that is what this is about. So if you think that the idea of free will or not having any free will is purely an abstract or theoretical idea, think again. It has incredibly powerful implications. Think about this in the right way. And especially in light of Buddhist ideas like rebirth, it is incredibly important, because then if you have no free will, you get reborn, and then reborn again. Then in the long run, no Buddhism is around. You don't know what is happening. You don't know where you get reborn next time. You don't know the cause and conditions that are going to work on you. It starts to become incredibly concerning what is going to happen in that broader context. And so this is the right way of thinking about these things. This is how you kind of approach the idea of right view in Buddhism. So these are some of the practical implications. But the last thing I want to talk about, and the last thing which I find maybe the most interesting thing of all among these things, is that there is, in fact, a way in which there is free will also in Buddhism. But it's in a different way. You have to look at this thing from a different kind of perspective. Now, one of the problems, when we talk about free will, it is often free will that doesn't really kind of live up to its name. You can choose between an apple and a banana for breakfast. There's not, who cares whether you have an apple or banana for breakfast, right? It's not going to make all that much difference. So it's a kind of poor free will. Or you are going to make choices in your life. You make kind of moral choices, but they're not very profound moral choices. They're kind of, they lean you a little bit in the right direction or a little bit in the wrong direction, but they don't have any really profound implications. And the problem is that with certain choices that we are actually incapable of making. And that is what is the interesting point. So we don't have free will at all from the point of view that we are deluded, we don't understand reality, so we cannot make certain choices that actually are truly beneficial for us. So if you know a little bit about the Buddhist path, and you know a little bit about the idea of Buddhist meditation, one of the main kind of things that we are moving towards in Buddhist meditation is the idea of samadhi, the idea of the stillness of the mind. But if I say to you, choose the stillness of the mind, because this is one of the happiest things you can possibly experience, you will be incapable of making that choice. Why? For two reasons. First of all, you may have no idea what it is. You may never have had it before. And because you have no idea what it is, you may not believe what I say even. Yeah, most people have no idea that there is such a thing as samadhi, right? They're completely clueless. And so they have no idea what real happiness even means. That's the first problem. The second problem is that even if you believe and you have some degree of confidence that samadhi exists, there are hindrances and defilements in your mind. There is wrong view and delusion in your mind that blocks you access from these things. You cannot actually achieve those things that really are worthwhile achieving. So what is this free will anyway? If it cannot actually give you access to those things that are really worthwhile achieving in the world, what's the point of this free will? And so I say that the real free will is first of all understanding what is really worthwhile achieving. What is actually important, and understanding that distinction between the apple and the banana, actually that's irrelevant. Forget about those apples and blooming bananas, right? That's not where it is at. That is not the thing. Where it is at in far more profound kinds of happiness than that. That is where. So first of all, you have to have the right view, the understanding of what actually is accessible in this world. Then, having that right view, you can start to do something with it. This is the first thing. So removing a little bit of delusion and wrong view right there. The second thing that you have to do is you have to remove those obstacles in your mind that block you from achieving these things. Once you remove those obstacles in your mind that block you from achieving those things, then you can make the choice to achieve them. Then you can sit down on your bottom and you can close your eyes, you can watch the breath, and you can actually be the most delightful and meaningful experience that you've ever had in your life. That is what you can do because you have removed the obstacles. That, to me, is the real kind of free will. The will that is free from the obstacles that block you from achieving what is true happiness and what is really meaningful in life. That is the real free will. And so that changes the equation, to me, to a far more useful and far more meaningful way of thinking about the idea of free will. Removing those obstacles that allow you to make truly important choices in life. Now you can choose the spiritual path 100%. Now you can choose profound meditation whenever you want. Why? Because you have removed the obstacles to those meditations. Now you can choose awakening itself. You can choose those insights that the Buddha had under the Bodhi tree 2,500 years ago, because you understand that is what life really is about. Before, you could never make those choices because you had no idea what was going on. And so this, to me, is the right way of thinking about the free will. The will that is free from obstacles. Then you can make choices. And one of these very interesting things about the arahants in the world, the arahants are the fully awakened beings, the beings who don't have any defilements anymore, who have made an end of suffering and all of these kind of things. They have full flexibility in their perceptions. They can perceive things in the way they want. They can perceive something as beautiful, or they can perceive it as ugly. They can perceive things as especially those two things, as repulsive or as delightful. They can look at things from various angles. They have complete flexibility in their perceptions. And that is what allows them to enter deep meditation and to see the world actually the way it is. The mind is free of all those obstacles that make those obstacles basically that trap us in suffering and trap us in problems. And that is the final idea of free will. And so, just to give you a quick summary of what I've been talking about, because I think that might be useful. And the first thing is that the kind of idea that we have in large part of the Western world of free will doesn't really make any sense from a Buddhist point of view. A Buddhist point of view where there is no self, there is no inherent essence in a human being, everything is just cause and conditions. So to talk about free will really is a derailment. The whole Buddhism is not like that. And in fact, as I mentioned, the Buddha says that in places, in the suttas, that actually you cannot choose your choices. But there still is karma. And karma is just the idea that when you do intentional acts, then it will have results. Regardless of whether that's free or not, that's irrelevant. Choices have results, and that is a very important point. And then there is the idea that when you know that you are caused and conditioned by things in the world, basically you are trapped. The cause and conditions trap you in a very profound way. And so you start to feel the sense of urgency. I've got to get out of this. This is really scary. This is like being entrapped in the world. Let me get out of this. And then when you start to see the path out of that entrapment, you start to understand that actually what I need to do, practice the Noble Eightfold Path, getting into deep samadhi, you start to understand that freedom of the will that you were looking for all along, now you have actually found it. Because that freedom of the will really was the freedom of abandoning all those blockages to the will. The very final thing I would say, just adding another point, because new points come up in your mind as you talk, so this is kind of how these things work. And the final point that I think is also really, really important with the idea of the will, is as you come to the very end of the Buddhist path, as you come to samadhi, as you come to these very profound meditations, there comes a point when the will disappears entirely, when the mind is completely still and solid, there's no more movement of any kind. And at that point, that is where you are likely to experience the highest happiness that you have ever experienced in your life. And at that point, the penny drops. This whole idea of willing is a problem. The whole idea of willing is dukkha. We have been discussing whether there's free will or no free will. When the whole willing is problematic, who cares if there's free will or not free will? The whole thing needs to be chucked out. And when you chuck out the whole thing, that is where you start to find the real, again, profound happiness on this path. And this is why these samadhis, these deep meditations are so powerful, and why they give rise to such an enormous amount of insight, because these are the kind of things that you start to see when you get there. And this is where you start to get very close to the awakening experiences themselves. So there you are. There's a tiny little talk for you about the idea of free will from a Buddhist perspective. Okay, so now, as always, you have the chance to comment or no complaints, please, but comments. Comments are okay.
Hi, this is something I've thought about a lot, so forgive me, but when we're talking about free will and determinism, I also just want to make sure that I'm understanding your point correctly as well. A lot of the discussions around free will and determinism happen on a spectrum, and that's part of the issue where people, I don't want to get too deep into more advanced philosophy that people might not have heard of, but even though it's pretty basic, Wittgenstein's language games where people will have different definitions of free will. From what I've understood with this talk tonight, you do say there is an ability to condition ourselves, and I think that if there is an ability for us to have a level of agency there to condition ourselves, I don't think it's necessarily in contradiction with a lot of people's understanding of free will, because if you look at that spectrum of complete free will, someone could start jumping up and dancing next to me or something like that. That's not something that would likely occur to a person and would not likely actually manifest because of the social conditioning of the room. So absolutely is the case that conditioning is a factor in this, but often it's often a question of how much that conditioning is an influence. And I'm just curious because you've talked about us choosing the ability to condition, but if there is a complete and total predetermination, then even a discussion around the ability for us to condition ourselves is kind of moot, because our response to that would be...
I get your point. Yeah, so I agree with the idea that there is a large spectrum of ideas of free will, from the idea of complete free will to complete determinism, and then of course I think very few people would talk about complete free will, because obviously we are conditioned in so many ways. I think that's very, very obvious. So the question is more, to what extent are we conditioned? That's kind of the real question. Is there no free will at all? Or is there a tiny bit of scope for free will? Or is that a little bit of free will? So what is actually the main, how do we look at this? And I would say the Buddhist point of view is that the free will is entirely impossible, because there is no agent outside of those causes and conditions that make us do a certain thing. And so when you say the idea that we can recondition ourselves, we can make that choice, therefore there must be free will, but not necessarily. Because the reason why you want to recondition yourself is because you understand how important it is to recondition yourself. Why do you understand that? Because the Buddha said so, or because someone else, wise person, said so, right? That also can come back to cause and conditions. It doesn't kind of prove that that there is some kind of self-agency there. So for me, the final point of view is simply basically the idea that from a Buddhist point of view, there is no agent that stands apart in any way whatsoever from cause and conditions. The agency is part of the matrix of cause and conditions. The agency itself arises out of that and becomes another cause and conditions for future cause and conditions. It's just a broader kind of causality. One of the kind of famous debates, I think, in the general idea of determinism is that the world goes in a certain direction. I think this was a Calvinist view in Europe back in the 16th or 15th, 16th century or whatever, is that you are predetermined at birth when you're going to go to hell or when you go to heaven. That's all predetermined. The world goes according to a certain clockwork, and our choices and intentions are irrelevant. But that, of course, is not the point. The point of Buddhism is that choice and intention is part of the cause and conditions, part of the nexus and matrix of cause and conditions. So it actually arises from cause and conditions and then in turn brings about new results as a consequence. That is kind of the Buddhist idea.
I just also have additional questions around how that influences the capacity for someone to adopt right view, because just for like additional context, like if the belief in free will is not right view, because I don't believe like that simply believing in free will or determinism actually is the deciding factor in whether there is free will or determinism, because that's a human perception there. That's outside of whether the view is actually correct or not. But I'm just curious what you have to say around it. Like there being a capacity to...
I don't think you have to kind of take a final position on that. I think it's necessary. But what I think is important is to understand how conditioned we actually are. And I think if you understand how conditioned we are, you take the idea of conditioning very seriously. And you start to understand that actually I need to be very careful how I condition myself. If this is true, that even if you just consider yourself 90% conditioned, and I think most people would agree that actually conditioning is very, 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 very high at the very least, then I have to make sure that that conditioning is going to be the right one. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of head down the wrong track, and it's going to become really problematic. So the insight
response,
is just...
though, not to be contrarian, sounds like...
Yeah.
It sounds like on the surface there's choice in it to say that, like, to respond to such a understanding of conditioning,
that's because,
but to say there isn't.
Also precisely. That's because that understanding is another cause and condition that conditions your choice, right? So that's kind of the whole point about the Dhamma or the teaching or whatever becomes another cause and condition. So if you hear that the idea of right view is really important and you believe that, you have to take that on board, then that becomes another condition that conditions your choices, and so all of these things kind of build up in this way here. Okay, let's have someone else can ask some questions. So if anyone else would like to say anything,
Thank you for the talk. Although I'm rethinking of saying thank you, because especially maybe to the Buddha, because he was just a cause and effect. What do you think about that?
Yes. Still good, yeah. It's still good to say thank you, because it's a good cause and it's a good effect. So even if it is just an effect, it's still a good one. So
would it be
good
more
effects are
being
good. Yeah.
grateful rather than saying thank you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also the desires that cause suffering, being desires.
Yeah.
You cannot volitionally change your desires, as Buddha would want you to change them, because cause and effect would have those desires be changed.
How should desires be changed?
The cause and effect would
Yeah.
make those desires change. You don't need to volitionally change them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not. It's like the idea is that there is volition, there is will, but that will comes from somewhere. And so when the Buddha says that desire is a problem, then the will starts to look for ways of actually changing that. Yeah, this is the point. The will is then caused or conditioned by the Dhamma, by the teaching of the Buddha, and then it starts to change because of that. And so, the moment you hear that desires are problem, you start to think, oh wait, yeah, maybe he's right. Yeah, maybe actually they cause me restlessness. They cause all these kind of things. They don't really lead to the results of peace and tranquility that I would like to achieve. And you recognize the Buddha is right. Well, the Buddha is right. Well, if the Buddha is right, I better do it. And so this is kind of how it works, right? You look at these teachings. If they make sense, you follow along, and then that has a conditioning effect on how you live your life. And then you start to desire less, or desire differently, you start to desire to come here. Yeah, yay, come here every week or whatever. And this is kind of the idea of the conditioning process. It changes the way kind of you live your life, not so much because you look at it, it makes sense, you reflect on it, and then you act accordingly. At the end of the day, what you want to do, and maybe I'll talk about this next time I give a talk here, which is in a couple of weeks' time, actually. The idea is that what we really want to do is to allow the Dhamma to express itself through us. The sense of self is really the problem here, because the sense of self is this feeling that you have a lot of agency, that you can do all of these kind of things. Yeah, so that is really the problem. The problem is not agency itself. We need to act. We need to have volition. We need to have will. We need to have choices. But those choices should ideally come from the Dhamma rather than from an I. When they come from an I, they're going to be delusive, and they're going to often lead in the wrong direction. But if those choices come from the Dhamma, because you understand, because you know what is right, you know what is appropriate, well, then it is going to lead somewhere positive. And that's kind of maybe the root idea here. Something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Thanks, Ajahn Brahmali. I'm glad you spoke about this tonight, because it always makes me feel a bit discombobulated thinking about it. I was just wondering, from the point of view that, so you kind of hear the word of the Buddha, and then that starts to condition you and incline you to kind of like a better path. How do you kind of make sense of, like, people that don't then hear the Buddha's word and stuff? It kind of seems a little bit unfair, and is it just luck, or how, does that kind of make sense? Or
yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it is. It's just that life is unfair. Yeah, that's kind of the thing. Yeah, life, or perhaps it is. Perhaps it isn't, in a sense. I mean, these people may have heard about Buddhism in the past life, then they lost it again. You may hear about Buddhism in this life. Next time around, you may not. You will be in the same place as those other people. Yeah, so maybe the difference isn't as great as you think it is. Yeah, and this is kind of the weird thing. If you look at it from perspective of one life, it may seem very unfair. But if you look at it from perspective of multiple lifetimes, everything may actually kind of pan out quite nicely and be quite reasonable. So I would say, don't think that you necessarily are in a privileged position. Make sure you kind of take this opportunity to the best of your ability. Otherwise, you may also fall back again in the future. So that's kind of the answer, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for the teaching today, Ajahn Brahmali.
Yeah.
You know, as I see it, okay, yeah, there's a lot of freedom, free will in Buddhism, okay. The Buddha's teaching is a pathway, towards enlightenment. It's a pathway to end our suffering, okay. He doesn't force us to do the thing. We do it at our own pace.
Yeah.
You don't have to believe it, okay, and and it doesn't take one life; it takes many lifetimes to do it. As like some other say religions, for example, there's all this fear created. There's no fear created in Buddhism.
So you think I'm talking rubbish? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't. I'm not saying. I mean, you're saying the condition to do certain. The condition. The thing. Okay.
Yeah.
It is I see it. That's he experienced it. He's telling us. Sometimes it takes longer time to understand it too.
Yeah. Do exactly. So do what you can. That's what you're saying.
The chicken and egg. That's why I feel. To me, it's there's a lot of freedom in Buddhism. In like monks, you can disrobe anytime, and there's no punishment.
Okay,
you can leave
I see
Buddhism.
what you mean. Yeah, I absolutely there is freedom, but I think the freedom in Buddhism to me is more to do with the kind of mental freedom. You feel free in the sense that you're not oppressed by things that you otherwise would be oppressed by. And this is the sort of freedom at the end of the Buddhist path. You're no longer oppressed by defilements or by suffering and by all of these kind of things. And so the freedom is of a slightly different kind. Of course, it's not that you are forced to do certain things. That's not the point of the idea of free will. The point is just that your choices are, there may be choices that feel right to you, but the fact that they feel right to you does not mean that they're not conditioned. Whatever.
Yeah. Also, certain things like desire bring all this. It's not desire. It's a crave. Okay. Certain thing needs time.
Yeah.
To sink into.
Okay. True. I agree. Yeah. Good.
Anyway, it's good to
to
know all this. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
What about the influence of advertising?
Advertising, right? There you are. That's the proof of no free will, isn't it? That's kind of the ultimate proof. That's exactly right. Yeah. So, are there any questions from outside, Bill, or is that not? There we are. So it's coming now. Okay. Good. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, so here we have a few questions from around the world, which is always really cool. So we have a question from Sri Lanka. Is it possible to change our future, at least to some extent? Could you also explain the role of uncertainty and horoscopes in this context? Is it possible to change the future? Absolutely. Yeah, your choices right now determine your future. And so make a good choice, and then your future will change. And so how do you make a good choice? Well, you do it as follows. First of all, you have as much right view as possible. You understand the teachings of the Buddha, and then you try to be mindful. You try to think. You stop yourself in your tracks and you ask, what does the Dhamma say in this case? Let me not just follow my immediate reaction. What does the Dhamma say? And the more mindfulness you have, and the more you allow the Dhamma to come through in your consciousness, the more you will be able to make good choices. That is regardless of whether there's free will or not. That's kind of irrelevant. This works regardless of that. So of course you can affect your future. In this kind of sense. So please make incredibly good choices. The better your choices, the better your future. The role of uncertainty and horoscopes in all of this. Okay, so even if things are determined in a very kind of profound sense, that does not mean that the future is certain. And the reason for that is because the possibilities are so incredibly large and so complex that you cannot actually predict the future regardless of that. So basically it is unpredictable, and that's kind of the main point. And that's why we make choices now, and those good choices will kind of lead you in the right direction. Horoscopes, astrology and that kind of stuff is interesting. I used to be super duper skeptical of horoscope. I thought it's complete and utter nonsense, to be honest with you. That's what I used to think. And the longer I'm a monk, the more kind of open-minded I become about all kinds of things, because I realize the world is a much stranger place than I thought it was. And that, who knows how things actually influence each other. The world is very complex. Mind is a very important aspect in the world. And what exactly, goes on. I mean, if the stars out there really are just completely stars out there and nothing else, or the moons and the planets or whatever, if it is just something that has no kind of relation to us, then of course there shouldn't be any influence, there shouldn't be any coincidence. But maybe it's not as simple as that. Maybe the stars and the moon and the kind of the planets of the world, maybe they represent something different, something larger. Something, a different view of, I don't know what, maybe a different mental reality or something like that. And if you look at the world from that point of view, maybe there is a correlation between these things. So I must admit, I have no idea about horoscopes. But it is possible then, if that is true, that there is some kind of relationship between, the kind of the heavenly bodies and human beings, then it is possible that you might be able to have some ideas, some general ideas about how the future is going to be. The human beings, we tend to develop in certain ways. The habits that we have when we're young, we tend to bring it into the future. And certain things tend to happen. We cannot predict details, but it may be possible to predict some larger scale things. Perhaps, maybe. I actually have no idea, but I'm not entirely kind of dismissing it anymore. Okay, so we have a question from Tim. Hello, Tim. Dear Ajahn Brahmali, what do you suggest is best to do when the mind doesn't seem to find joy in the present and instead keeps ruminating about the past, thus making it hard to meditate and appreciate what we already have? So there's two things that you always need to do in meditation, especially to stop the ruminating mind, and that is to understand, first of all, the suffering of all the rumination, the suffering of all the thinking, why it is kind of utterly irrelevant, why it doesn't lead you anywhere, why it is pointless. And the more you understand that, the less likely you are to do it, because the mind doesn't want to do what is stupid and pointless. The other thing is to find the happiness and the joy of the alternative, which in this case is meditation. Try to enjoy the simple things, Don't just look for kind of profound joy or anything like that, but just enjoy the sense of peace, enjoy the sense of not having anything to do, enjoy the sense of being able to relax, to rest the mind, and these little things. And as you do that, the mind then will incline, maybe, hopefully, towards being more still and being more peaceful. And the other thing that you need to do, and this is kind of so fundamental, this is why the path is an integrated path and all the various parts actually belong together, is that you start to understand the importance of the other aspects of the path. Why it is important to be generous, why it is important to be kind, why it is important to live a moral life, why it is important to forgive, to be compassionate, to have love even for the people in the world, And you develop that side of things, because that side of things will gradually enable you to feel that joy and that happiness in your meditation practice. Question number 3. Robots have no free will, so they do what the programming dictates, but they don't suffer or experience happiness, right? Doesn't it take free will to interpret the conditions we are faced with? If we are stuck in habit, then how do we move forward or improve? Okay, I think I have already talked about this quite a bit, but doesn't it take free will to interpret the conditions we are faced with? No, it just takes intelligence. It just takes observation, Where does that intelligence come from? Well, it comes from conditions in the past. Where does the observing come from? That also comes from conditions in the past. You have been taught to observe because that's good, and so you observe. And so, no, it doesn't take free will to interpret the conditions. It just takes observation. So if you are stuck in habit, well, you have to recondition your habits, basically, as I've been talking about today. So then we have a question from Fiona. Hello, Fiona. I tried to will myself into having compassion with the mind for so long. I came off medication. I started to have empathy, compassion without trying. Do you know why? This is interesting, isn't it? You try to will it, and then it doesn't happen, and then suddenly it just happens without trying. And that's kind of beautiful, because sometimes the will is misdirected. Sometimes the will doesn't understand how these things work. The will is often the I, and the I often doesn't have the wisdom to understand these things. And so then when you leave the I to one side, you drop the sense of ego, the sense of self, then somehow the mind itself, the Dhamma, shines through you, and it finds the right way to have compassion and forgiveness. This is kind of the strange thing in this world. So by reconditioning yourself, by having this thing I call right view, looking at in the world in the right way, that is very often what leads to the compassion and the kindness, and not you willing it, not you doing it, but allowing the Dhamma to do it through you. That is kind of what I was talking about before. Okay. Yeah. You want to... Okay. Can you make it a quick one, please? Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm blanking a little bit under the pressure. Just around the delusion of free will, do you think that that's something that arises out of ego? And if so, wouldn't also acknowledging that be a bit of a trap into falling into ego if one had a desire to kind of diminish that delusion?
So you're saying that the diminishing delusion comes from a sense of self? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Or can do?
I was going to say more specifically that the perception that one has free will, because that can be very attractive. Do you believe that ego plays a role in that?
Yeah,
and if so,
absolutely.
Does acknowledging that and having a desire that stems from that sense of ego and wanting to diminish it because you want to get closer to right view.
Right.
But then
that's a very important
just a
point.
level of acknowledging that, though, feels like a bit of a trap in terms of this desire to dissolve that ego in a way that feels quite reactionary.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. It's a very important point, and it's actually, maybe I should have said more about that, but that is precisely the problem. Problem is, this is kind of the whole idea of the illusion of a self, that the self, that illusion comes after the fact, after you have made a choice, and then it takes credit for the choice. But it's actually, and that is fundamentally what the problem is about. It feels like we're making choices, but this is what the illusion of a self is about in Buddhism. That feeling is actually a delusion. It is a distraction, and it is wrong. That's kind of what really this is all about. That's a very important point. So once you can start to see that more, how these choices kind of almost happen by themselves, you start to understand what the Buddha is talking about.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, so that is it for tonight. One more, can we, okay. Right, okay.
Sorry, I couldn't decide to ask earlier. I'm actually visiting from Canada because I was like asking through a screen just wasn't enough.
Okay, all right, good,
And I, being here and visiting Perth and Western Australia Buddhist Society was actually a really big thing for me. And I guess maybe there's a little bit of delusion, but I made the conditions happen, applied for the visa, bought a plane ticket, made it so that the conditions are right so that I could be here.
Great. Yeah.
And now
good.
I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was planning on staying here for a bit. I got a job offer, and so it was nice. I'm here now. But then right after I left, I landed in Cairns and I left. I actually got another job offer and a call that would allow me to stay here longer, and also provide free accommodation and stuff like that. But that means that I'd have to leave, and there's a lot of jeopardizing the future with that, because if I don't take this, then I might have to leave after a year, for example. Do you know what I mean?
Is this a question about free will or a question about what you're going to do with your life in Australia?
Maybe a little bit of both.
What I recommend, come up after, I'll talk to you personally afterwards.
Okay,
that's much
sure.
better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's do just pay homage to Buddha Dhamma Sangha.